This week, my guest is Scott McKeown, and Scott is, well, probably needs no introduction, really. He is a partner with Wolf Greenfield in their Washington, D.C. office. He is one of the preeminent PTAB practitioners in America, and I think still at this point has handled more PTAB cases than any other lawyer. And he represents both challengers and he represents patent owners, and he's a friend. So it's good to see you, Scott. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Gene. Maybe used to be the most active practitioner when we had a PTAB. So
when you okay, well that kind of defines the conversation I think we're gonna have. You're probably still the most active, I suppose, because nobody is more active. I mean, it's kind of been depressed across the board for PTAB cases, right? But I don't want to put words in your mouth. What do you see happening?
I mean, it's a political upheaval, in a nutshell. I think a lot. Well, some of that was expected, right? We expected that when we got Trump 2.0, that they would go back to the FinTIB policies of Trump 1.0, at least, right? At a minimum. The former policies under Director Vidal were, we expected some rollback there, but I think we've gotten to the point in U.S. government where, not to get too political, but, every time you have a change from Democrat or Republican, it becomes, well, let's not only roll everything back, but let's go even further, right? So when, if the next administration comes in, they're going to have to work that much harder to get back to where we could live with it. And so we're seeing things that we've never seen before, changes every week, theories and policies. I've called them the Chewbacca defenses in the past. They just don't make any sense, right? It's just settled expectations. From a policy perspective, you can look at that and say, well, maybe that's the way the system should work, like trademarks, right? Incontestability and things like that. But if you go into a district court and you say, well, I've had this patent for 8 years, you should throw out the entire invalidity case. That's not going to happen. So, very unusual, very policy-driven concepts and notions that, frankly, you would expect to see come from the legislature and not the executive branch. And so everyone's sort of struggling with that. There's been multiple lawsuits. There's probably going to be a lot more. There are rule packages, presumably, that are coming to codify all this and commit it to regulation. There'll be lawsuits there. There'll be controversy there. So it's, every day there's, seemingly some, new chaotic proposal. And it's not just the PTAB either. It's, last Friday before the holiday, we found out that there's no more, no union for patent examiners anymore. So, not getting political, but I think it's safe to say it's the worst thing that ever happened to the patent office in my lifetime, and I'm not dead yet. So I'm pretty comfortable that this is it's just bad all around. And I'm not blaming the current administration, because a lot of this is coming from on high of bringing people back to the office and these heartbeat emails and Doge and all of this stuff. But the impact on the agency has just been, completely demoralizing, and we've had a brain drain from the examining corps, from the PTAB, and that's just not good for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm conflicted in a lot of respects, and I do think that it's almost no way that you can't make this at least small p political. I don't think it has to go to R versus D to recognize that what's going on is perfectly what you said. There's this snapback, and then there's also, not in our space, but like right now, just coming in here today, listening to the radio, listening to President Trump talk about, like, Chicago, for example, what he would like to do there to try and make it safer, and then listen to what Governor Pritzker says. It's like they're not even playing the same sport. They're not in the same stadium. It's like, I don't understand what really is going on. I mean, because everybody can't be entitled to their own facts, but it seems like that's just like goes across the board, and it almost feels like what American politics have become is really fanatical. And I mean that like in a sports analogy. Like, you are a fan of this team, you root for them, and quarterback throws an interception. It's like, oh, get it next time, you'll be great, and you'll root, no matter how bad he is, because he's your quarterback. And that probably will come across maybe not the way I intended it, but it's hard to watch some of this stuff. And I do think, so I like settled expectations. I get the problem with settled expectations being that, well, some of these things people didn't know that were going to get enforced against them. But I look at the trademark side of the building, and you have only but a certain amount of time to challenge trademarks. And then if you wait too long, you can't challenge them, unless there's fraud, once a trademark reaches incontestable status. But that's not what the patent system is. I think what we need is another 1952 moment to kind of set the stage, because I think a lot of what's going on does make sense, but not within the current guardrails of the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a fairness perspective, settled expectations it just makes sense to people, right? The government shouldn't give you something and then a couple years later, after you build a business around it, take it back, right? I completely sympathize with the independent inventors that's happened to, but at the same time, again, just going back to what's happening right now, we know examination quality was a problem, and now, right, we're going to bring back thousands of examiners back to the patent office. How many are going to quit because they don't want to do that? 10%, 15%, whatever. So the examiners are shrinking. The people that are staying are the people that don't have as many options as others, right? So the expertise is leaving, and now we're sort of chaining examiners to the radiator, saying, well, you don't have a union anymore. Forget about this count system. We're going to double what, obviously none of this has been announced, but right, this is the concern of there's going to be less people there. They're going to be less skilled. The supervisors have left. They've cut their time to do training. So you've got this sort of steep drop-off in expertise at the same time that the agency is sort of, riding herd to say we need to get rid of this backlog. So you're pumping all of these patents back into the system, which we know are going to have problems. And at the same time, you're saying, well, no, we don't want to give them a second look. That's for the courts to decide. And we know what the problem is there. There is, setting aside the non-practicing entity and troll labels, it's now sort of evolved to litigation as a business. There are billions of dollars in litigation funding available now to assert patents, and the litigation funders, frankly, don't care how valid they are or how strong they are. It becomes game theory. And so we have, this billion-dollar business of litigation as a business that's out there, and they're suing American companies, right? So, yes, settled expectations make sense when you're talking about trademarks, and, well, if there was a mistake, you're taking from a competitor that may not have been policing their marks, may not have been noticing. But with patents, you're taking something out of the public domain, and now you're taxing the American public on it. And, we've seen decisions coming out of the agency on different drugs and, important things to the country. And for the patent office to say, well, we don't know if we even though you paid us $60,000, we don't know if this is a good use of our resources. It just doesn't make sense to me. And if we are going to make that decision, it needs to come from the legislature, right? To your point, politically in this country, we're now arm wrestling, right? I push this way, you push the other way. We don't compromise. It's just, there's one absolute winner. And we just can't have this flip-flopping back and forth between essentially two different governments. When Trump first came into office, one of the executive orders he issued very quickly was, hey, all of you executive agencies, you need to stop making law with memos and doing all of this stuff. And then I think, after his first 4 years, there was this sort of realization of, well, it takes so long to change anything through Congress. Congress is broken. Now we're just going to flip the switch, and we're going to do it this way, and we're going to shut down agencies, and we're going to, not follow mandates, and we're going to starve off the parts that we don't like. And so that's where we are, which if your side is in power, that's great. But in a couple of years, it's going to flip right back. And so all of the things that are happening now that, some people may be applauding, what happens when we get a director in 3 years that says, you know what, not only are we going to undo everything that was just done under Trump, but Right now we're going to have a pilot program, and we're going to get your PTAB filing through from filing of the petition to final written decision in 12 months. We're going to charge petitioners an extra $10,000 because we know what happens in Texas. We don't like it. We think that Albright, right, and friends down there, they should be staying the cases. And if they're not going to do that, we're just going to go super fast, right? That's going to be the sort of snapback reaction. And I just don't think that the system needs to be, waffling back and forth between extremes. It's no good for anyone.
So there's a lot on the table here, and one of the reasons I always like talking to you is because we, I think, largely disagree on these issues, or I wouldn't say disagree. We see different aspects of it. And when I talk to you, you open my eyes a little bit to the other side. And I mean, I do get, and I've always appreciated, when you say, these are patents being used to sue American companies and that. But then, I do think at some point in time that if we don't have quiet title for patents, people aren't going to be able to use them. Certainly not in a way that is maximizes the opportunity. And are you against, just fundamentally in a vacuum, are you against settled expectations being considered? And not to say not to endorse what Director Stewart has done or what Howard Lutnick wants to see happen, but just in a vacuum, do you think that there is a role for that?
I just don't know how you get there. I mean, again, from a fairness perspective, it makes sense. If I had my own patents, right, I would want to be able to feel comfortable before I dump millions of dollars into my business that these aren't going to be taken away from me. But at the same time, I also know that every time I sue someone, they're going to tell me my patent's invalid. So it's not just a patent office thing. It's just the way the litigation system works as well. But patent owners are not as concerned because all of the burdens and things, sort of favor them in the district court. So they're more concerned about infringement than they are invalidity. But how do you get to settled expectations? There would have to be some kind of process to say, okay, you've had this patent, either you brought it to the agency voluntarily before you started suing people for a second look, or, it's been challenged once or twice and failed. Therefore, now you get settled expectations. There has to be some kind of metric other than, well, you've had it for a long time. Therefore, if there was a mistake, don't worry about it, right? That doesn't make sense because the people paying the bill at the end of the day are the American taxpayers. You're taking something out of the public domain and charging the American public for it. So, the safeguards there, I would think, need to be pretty significant.
So the thing with the way that the trademark system works is, you have 5 years. And if you don't challenge within 5 years, you can challenge, but you lose almost all the arrows in your quiver,
right?
And unless there was fraud, there's a couple reasons: fraud committed on the patent office in obtaining the trademark, or it becomes generic. But other than that, all the other reasons why the trademark should be no longer trademarked or shouldn't have been trademarked in the first place, you've lost those challenges.
Yeah.
And the system works because people know that, right? And also on the trademark side, there's a certain reputational goodwill harm that if you do not police your trademarks, the damage it's so easy to do damage. It's so hard to build up goodwill. And, we've seen throughout our history all kinds of examples, like with the BP oil spill. I mean, BP could have been the perfect company, the best company in the world. And that one afternoon became the pariah. Same thing with Exxon to some extent, the Exxon Valdez, right? If you're a certain age, that was just catastrophically bad. So with your trademark in your name, you have to prevent harm from happening. Mm-hmm. That's not the patent system that we have.
Yeah, it's at least at a high level that incontestability makes sense. But again, what's the downside of right hiring? You hire a service, they monitor. If you're in the laptop space and you're monitoring trademarks for laptops, there's 1 or 2 a month or what have you, right? It's not this difficult job. There's no willful infringement you have to worry about if there's some record that you saw this mark. So there's a lot of differences there, and then there's just the scope, right? I think if you talk to most companies that find themselves defendants all the time and you ask them, let's just say, going back in time, had you been able to monitor, would you have even found this patent? And the answer probably would usually be no. I mean, this patent relates to editing of physical film, and some filmmaker filed it, but the claims were so broad it turned out that it read on the DVD standard. Yeah. How could we have ever seen that argument coming? You just can't.
Well, that is a problem that I have with the whole patent system, and not just the PTAB or the litigation system, but and I don't know that I blame the patent office. I would blame the Federal Circuit largely, because if you look at the dawn of the Federal Circuit, back in 1980, patents were much shorter. You go back 100 years and they were maybe 2 pages of text, maybe 1 page of drawings. And if it was really complicated, it would be a little bit longer, not much longer than that. And that was all of them, no matter how complicated it was. And you would read the patent and everybody would know what was invented and what was covered and what was not covered. Mm-hmm. And applications have gotten so long, 50 to 100 page applications are not uncommon. You'll have dozens of drawings. Sometimes some of the, in the computer area, you'll have 40, 50 drawings. Mm-hmm. I'm a fan of a lot of drawings, but you have so much disclosure, and yet we don't seem to be able to know what the patent actually covers. And I don't know how we got into that. I mean, I think I can trace each of the steps, right? Because the court will say, oh, well, you didn't do this. You needed to do that. And so then the people who are drafting the patents, then they start to do that. And it's never enough. So then you have to do more and more and more and more. And somewhere along the way, you get to the end of these patents that have been drafted and you read them and you're like, I have no idea what the innovation is. Because now, thanks to the Supreme Court and KSR, and it was probably trending in this direction beforehand, you can't actually identify what you think is innovative. Because if you do, the examiners use that against you to say, oh, well, then it was obvious. If you can articulate the problem, then the solution was obvious, which is just nonsense.
I would say, something like 90% of the patents I'll read the specification, and I'll think to myself, okay, that's a pretty interesting way to, accomplish X. And then you get to the claims and you say, wait a minute, this reads on the background, right? This isn't what was invented. So it's functional claiming, especially in the predictable arts, consumer electronics. I mean, that's been a struggle for decades now. There were initiatives underway at the patent office to try to tamp down on functional claiming, but ultimately that's where it ends up is you've got claims directed to a function rather than the way that you've sort of met that function or implemented that function, which is the invention. And so, it's tough for examiners on that level. It's tough that they don't have the resources and the time to do the job. But, knowing all this, that's why we can't have settled expectations.
So therefore I'm right, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't know how
Not me. I mean, you're admitting I'm right. You're saying so, and therefore what I said earlier is correct.
Well, I don't see... Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on the examination quality and the problem with claim scope, but I just don't see how you can come up with a system that settled expectations that sort of addresses all those shortcomings.
So I think you can, but I think it is going to require a fundamental rejiggering of the entire system, and I think. So let me throw this out there. And one of the things that has come up recently in one of the podcasts we did with Patrick Kilbride, he said, I just think obviousness, we should do away with obviousness. If it's new, it's patentable. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people have been talking about that idea and then in some countries they have that as the standard, at least they have a 2-tier patent system, a petty patent and then, lack of a better way of saying a regular patent. where the petty patent maybe gets 10 years protection and only gets examined for novelty. I mean, maybe we could think about something like that. The other thing that I think maybe, and this maybe addresses the backlog, it addresses quality to some extent, and it addresses a lot of these things, obviously is going to require a statutory change, is the examiners only examine for novelty.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then, before you want to go to federal district court, you have the opportunity to go back to the office and have a thorough workup of the application. And maybe if we don't want to get rid of obviousness altogether, maybe if that's at the point when we look at obviousness and define, okay, what is really the invention here? And it addresses a couple things. One, it gets us through the backlog. It would get patents issued very quickly. And then if you had a off-ramp that maybe you don't want to wait until litigation, you could do it all at the beginning, but then that process for going through to get the quote-unquote gold-plated patent would be more onerous and more costly. And maybe you could go through that process at any point in time. Like, let's say before you built a $1 billion factory to create the widget that you've invented, at this point, well, now I need to know. Now I really need to know. It's been okay to have this patent up until now without it being thoroughly examined, but now I need to know. And I think we could do it in a lot smarter way, because a way I look at what's going on at the office, and there's still examiners that don't issue anything, and there's examiners that issue everything, and that needs to be fixed. I don't know how you fix that, but smart people need to get in a room and talk that one out and brainstorm, because that's a huge problem. But if what we did is we had the examiners push through these things relatively quickly, and then for the ones that matter, whatever that means. It means maybe it matters to you, so you want to do it now, you want to pay more. Maybe it matters to you because now you want to start a licensing campaign, or it matters to you because you want to enforce this patent, or it matters to you because you need the investment and you need to, give more certainty to your investors. Then we do the deeper dive. And I think that way, well, I mean, I think it's got problems, obviously. People won't like it, but I don't know where we go from here unless we are willing to fundamentally shake things up to a different system.
Yeah, prosecutors get mad at me when I say this, but I would argue we already have that system, because if you file a Track 1 application in the USPTO, you're getting a patent, right? Examiners hate them. Everyone that wants a patent quickly will file a Track 1 filing, and they'll get their patent. And then what happens when they assert them, right? They end up going back to the PTAB. So that's sort of the gold plating. But yeah, I don't know what the answer is, right? I mean, in a perfect world, the examination would get it right the first time. Maybe as AI develops, examination quality increases. Examiners won't love it because it means that they're less important. But as long as you have a human element where some humans are really good and others, it's their first job, they're a year and a half into it, they just need to check off a couple boxes and get their counts, you're just going to have wildly different patent quality, and that's just the way the system works. And so there has to be some quality control mechanism somewhere.
So, and that's what I was trying to solve for in this process, right? The ones, because there is this wild divergence. There's some examiners that don't let you get anything, and there's some examiners that let you get a lot. And if you made it easier to get some kind of a patent, and then you push through to, the more experienced examiners, or you could make them judges. They could be PTAB judges that review these things that matter the most. I mean, because I still think, maybe I should ask you, is it still like 98% of patents only make the patent attorney money? I mean, what percentage?
I mean, in terms of patents that go through the system and actually get
yeah,
litigated?
they're actually valuable, that make the owner money.
I mean, it's hard to say, right? I mean, is a patent valuable because it was in a lawsuit and resulted in damages, or is one of 10,000 in an IBM portfolio that brings in billions, right? It's quantity matters to some, quality matters, in the drug and pharma context usually. But, you're talking about SCPs and some of these larger licensing shops. it's just safety in numbers for them. So
right. Now, I was just having that conversation with somebody, and it still is in the SEP space, absolutely a game of global thermonuclear war.
yeah.
If you don't have enough warheads, and they're trying to solve that on some level, right? Because it can't be just that you went and you took this patent and you got 100 continuations on it, so now you got 101 patents. When one or maybe 5 or 10 would have done. So, you're not going to get 101x when you've contributed maybe 5x or 10x. And some of these problems, I almost don't know what to do, but I look at the system and it is so fundamentally broken. And one of the real frustrating things, I know I've said this many times before and I've written about it, I thought when we were doing the AIA, when we first started down that path, that what we were going to do was create a system that made sense, where you weave in the ITC and the district court and the PTAB and the patent office, and you create this system where different entities have different lanes. And we have this, Ghostbusters analogy. We're crossing streams all over the place, right? Nothing good happens when you cross streams. And you have sometimes it's the PTAB, the ITC, the district court. They all have jurisdiction over this particular patent and these particular claims, and they all have a different role to play, and they different standards. And you get eBay at one, you don't get eBay at another one. It's BRI, it's clear and convincing. You could not, drunk on a bet, create a screwier system than the U.S. patent system.
And that's part of the frustration, I think, for at least on the patent owner side, whether you're an independent inventor or you're, C-suite executive. Well, I got the patent, right? I sued someone a couple of years ago. We won that one, and now you're telling me it's going to be declared invalid either by the PTAB or someone else. From an outside perspective, I can see how that doesn't make sense, but yeah, there's a lot of layers to the process.
And that's another thing I do think that needs to change. And I get that, and I think it's with the blonder tongue case that says everybody gets to challenge on their own. You get sued, you can challenge. That can't be right. That can't be right. Not for all of the situations, right? Because we're dealing with some of these patent portfolios are being infringed by dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of people. You can't have hundreds or thousands or even multiple dozens of challenges against the same patent. At some point in time, you have diminishing returns. Now, I get the concern about a straw man. I don't want to have somebody get a patent, then say, "Hey, brother-in-law, will you challenge my patent and do a really crappy job?" It's like it's like what was going on with was that VLSI, the VLSI case, yeah, and Open Sky. We can't tolerate, the system can't tolerate that. But at the same token, if it is a legit challenge, and one of the other things I've thought about a lot and I've written about is we probably have to have something in the system akin to the way that we handle tax sales and bankruptcies. It's like, okay, come one, come all. If this matters to you, show up and give us your best case, because if you don't show up now, then you're not going to be able to show up. And I would probably be willing to have an asterisk next to that, right? If you could demonstrate that the patent and the claims as issued really have nothing to do with what you're doing, or it would be unreasonable to believe that patent could be used against you, then you should be able to challenge that. But if there is a way that you could identify, say, well, this could reasonably, and maybe this gets us back into opinion work, would a reasonable patent attorney, patent litigator, or whoever we say is the hypothetical person, look at this patent and look at what you were doing, and would they believe that there's a risk here? And if there is, and then you don't show up when we call out, you got 120 days to show up to be heard, and if you don't show up, well, then you got to live with the consequences.
Yeah, I think that gets back to scope, though, right? If you are Quinn Industries and you say, I've got a patent on a TV, and so everybody that manufactures TVs needs to come and challenge if they don't like it. and right, I represent, some TV manufacturer. I look at your claims and I say, well, we don't do that. I have no idea what your crazy theory is on your claim scope. And then, right, I mean, that's part of the problem, is just being able to see these things
so
ahead of time.
Let's take a step back. How could we address that? Maybe it's a situation where you require the patent owner to put certain people on notice. Right, and if the patent owner does put those folks on notice and they don't come up to challenge, well, now maybe we're having a different conversation.
Well, to do that,
I'm
you would
really
need
looking
to,
for an answer here.
You would need to say, I'm Quinn Industries. I think this reads on manufacturer X, Y, and Z, and you need to come. I'll explain to you why I think it reads on your products, and right now you can beat me up in some kind of proceeding on invalidity. I don't know the patent owners would be any happier with sort of the block party PTAB, which that would sort of invite.
Well, if it's a block party PTAB, I think, listen, you're right. There are going to be patent owners that hate all of this. What I'm trying to do is come up with a system that makes sense, that most people can live with. And I think like the people for example, Finjan, who had 128 PTAB challenges, their portfolio was only 28 patents.
Yeah.
These patents were getting challenged 5, 6, 7 times a piece, right? And I understand Finjan only ever lost one claim at the PTAB. We got to do away with it. We got to deal with that, right? So if there's a way that you can have the block party, everybody show up, and then it's one and done, and then from that point forward, you have settled expectations. At least with respect to those people who are legitimately put on notice, know or should have known, we can figure out what the standard is. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know how patent owners could, because that's much better than the system that we have right now.
I agree in principle if we could come up with a solution where we could say, this is what you have to do, otherwise there will be settled expectations. That makes sense to me, as opposed to, well, your patent's X years old and that's good enough for us, right? That just doesn't make sense.
And I thought we were going to get to a place like this, because I think even though we come at these issues from different sides, it's probably not different viewpoints, because we're not on different sides, right? I mean, because I see the abuse of the patent owners, I see the abuse of the people who are the infringers or alleged infringers, and there's a lot of abuse to go around in both directions, right? Nobody is Snow White here.
No.
I think there are some people that are wearing closer to white hats. There's some people that are wearing closer to black hats, but there's no absolutes in this space.
I mean, I've defended patents that had 9 IPR petitions filed at the same time against it, and that should not have happened.
And that's another thing that. Right?
But to the PTO's credit, right, they've cleaned up the serial and parallel filings, and people just continuously throw out those 12-year-old examples as if it's still going on. Right. And
is that still going on where like people can file 5 or 6 IPRs against the same patent? In order, because of the number of claims and the page limits, and
if there's 150 claims and you can't fit more than 30 in a filing, then you're going to see 5 filings. But what they have tamped down is if you've got 10 claims and someone just decides to file 10 IPR petitions because they have the money and challenges all those 10 claims, 35 different ways, you can't do that anymore.
Right.
So you can't do that. But if you go out and sue 5 different people, are they, individually going to file their own petitions? Probably. And there's been some developments in determining, who's on the same team there and whether or not that's fair. So the patent office has done, I thought, I think a pretty decent job in the serial parallel department. But, it's still, if you're filing a lawsuit, you're going to see a PTAB filing.
Yeah. So with respect to the filing multiple challenges against the same patent, one of the reasons I think people do that too, and it's not, they wink wink nod nod, a lot of them will say, oh, it's the page limit, so many claims and all this, and there's some to that for sure, but it is also much greater likelihood that the PTAB will institute if they have 5 or 6 challenges against the same patent versus just one challenge against that patent, because the way the quota system works, then they get 5 or 6x.
Not necessarily. There's some internal balancing that's done. I've only filed parallel filings in 2 circumstances. One, where I was making an alternative argument. You're not entitled to your priority. Here's some prior art. Even if you are, right, here's another petition. Or here's a petition on the first 30 claims, here's a petition on claims 40 through 70, right? Just because I couldn't fit them, all in one filing. But I think most of those abuses have been gone for a number of years now.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, the fact that you've only ever done it twice tells me that it really should be the extraordinary situation. And it always probably should have been. And that all these other people that were doing this as a matter of course were really just gaming.
There were only one or two companies that sort of systemically would always go overboard and file 10.
But those were huge companies that filed a lot.
Yeah, and like I said, I was on the wrong side of those, and it wasn't fun. But like I said, to the PTAB's credit, they were able to put a stop to most of that.
So just to give us an idea, and I usually ask this off the top, like where are you representing now? Last time you were here, it was probably 2/3 petitioners, 1/3 patent owners.
Yeah, it varies, but I would say traditionally it's probably 60-40 petitioners usually.
Okay, so you're doing it a little bit more, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, if I was a patent owner, I always say this, and it's not just because you're my friend. I mean, you're very good at what you do, and I think that if people need some PTAB representation and you're not on the short list, they would have some explaining to do if I was on the board of directors.
Thank you. But I mean, if you can take them apart, you can put them back together. So
right. No, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because you know what shots you're going to take and what shots are going to likely prevail or have the highest chance of prevailing. Do people bring you in on patents that may be a lot, very important to them to get you to look at it before they even file?
Yeah, we do a lot of sort of, I'll call it late stage prosecution where, you're either going into an acquisition situation or you're going into litigation and you need to present your IP strategy and make sure it's coherent, or you've got the claim scope and you've got the cannon fodder to go through a war. And so, do a fair amount of reissues and sort of some prosecution counseling as far as that goes.
Uh-huh. So what else is going on at the board at the moment? I mean, that you can talk about?
I mean, in general, the current administration does not like the PTAB. I mean, that's pretty clear, and that's obviously coming on from down, from on high.
Yeah, I've heard Howard Lutnick hates the PTAB.
Well, that would make sense given everything that's going on. So, it is very unusual to see an interim director doing as much as Koch has done, and clearly there's coordination there. Mm-hmm. So, like I said, there's sort of new developments every week. There's more developments coming. Will there be a riff of judges at some point? Probably. I think the long-term goal is, well, let's starve off the workflow, and then we can get rid of some of the judges. And then again, like I said, when the next administration comes in, they'll just have that much more work to do to put it all back together. I mean, this is just
well, speaking of that, we just had last week as well. I mean, it may have happened before last week. Last week was when I learned about it. Chief Judge Bullock and Vice Chief Tierney have been moved from the board over to the Central Reexamination Unit. And I know a lot of people have said that was a demotion. Mm-hmm. And while that maybe seems logical based on the history of what the office has done with the CRU, I've been told by people inside the patent office that was not intended to be a demotion. And that what I was told is that it was to move those two into the senior executive positions. Mm-hmm. So I suppose now we watch what happens at the CRU. Is it going to take on more importance? Is there stuff that Koch and Secretary Lutnick want to clean up at the CRU? And then do we see Scott Bullock and Mike Tierney rise within the senior executive ranks? And time will tell, I suppose. What have you heard, if anything?
I mean, historically, it's not been a promotion. I mean, historically, that's where they parked people to get them out of the way. Former Chief Judge Rushke was there for a decade, right? After he left, becoming Chief Judge, that's where he went. There's been other senior PTAB folks that have been put there in recent months that have quit. So at least the people that have been put there recently didn't view it as a promotion, and I don't think it's a promotion. The CRU is doing ex parte reexamination and reissue. What's the priority there? I mean, it would be one thing to put some personnel there, but the chief and someone like Mike, who was also pretty high up and respected, to put them in that role, I mean, I'm not.
So let me throw this by you. Two thoughts. Number one, there was a lot of people who thought when Farina Rashid moved from solicitor over to the PTAB that she was being kind of sidelined, and that was not a promote. But now, in this latest, if you want to call it a shakeup at the board, she's moved up into, I think she's now vice chief or something like that. So obviously there was and I was told at the time, again, that there was not an intention to sideline her, and it was not a demotion. And a lot of people didn't believe that because you go from solicitor, but now she's rising within the ranks of the PTAB. So maybe that wasn't a demotion. Obviously, if it was a demotion, they probably wouldn't have put her in a position of authority at the PTAB. The other thought that I have there is I hear more and more and more about use of reexamination after the IPR process. So if this is not a demotion for Scott and Mike over at CRU, then it would seem to me that we're going to get some cleaning up of this after the fact secondary reexamination after the board has said no for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I know there's been at least some work there recently to convert the CRU to a count system. So that was some of the work that was being done by some of the other folks that were there. I don't know what the new initiative is there. Certainly, I think the current administration would like to restrict reexamination if somehow that becomes the outlet for, the PTAB filings for patents that are 7 years old that are not going to get past the discretionary hurdles. Who knows? I mean, part of the personnel reshuffling is also making room for people that are friendly and have been helping the administration. Sharon Israel is now, I think, moved over to the PTAB where she was more on the policy side before. And so, that could be some of it too, is just putting in place the management or the leadership team you want for the next couple of years that are definitely on your side because you've sort of brought these people along. Not that, certainly Judge Bullock was not a troublemaker. He's probably the least confrontational guy on the planet. Yeah. But, maybe it's just there's only so many seats and you want to reward the ones that have sort of, helped you along.
Maybe. I don't know. I like Judge Bullock. I like Judge Tierney. Judge Tierney over the years became a friend, as many of these folks do. And I remember going out, and we were always invited during the AI, leading up to the AIA passes, 5th anniversary. He and I would get invited often to the same programs to speak, and I got to know him really well. So selfishly, I hope it's not a demotion because I do think somebody like Tierney, and not to say that not Bullock. I like Scott Bullock. I just know Judge Tierney much better, and I would think that he would do very well. I mean, if he's going to rise within the senior ranks at the patent office, I think that would be a great thing to happen.
Yeah, they're both highly competent, very well respected. It's just like I said, historically, that's been a place to sort of just clear the table for the next course. So
yeah, so we'll see. To be continued, I suppose. There's not much more that we could say about that. So what are we seeing now in terms of institutions? Are institutions going up? I've also heard rumor. I'll share with you that what I've heard is that the patent office may be getting ready to even go the next step with the bifurcation of institutions already. Director Stewart has the discretionary denials. And for a long time, there's been a lot of people who have not liked the fact that the PTAB that institutes is the one that makes the decision. And that, I've heard, could change. I don't know how soon that could change. I don't even know for sure that it's true or not. There's a lot of rumors.
Yeah, no, I've heard that they're considering going from the judges that institute, switching them out with a different set for final written decision. It's one of those things that I think people have complained about, like they did BRI versus Phillips, that I just don't think is going to make that big of a difference. But if it makes people feel better, fine. I guess the concern I do have with using 6 judges instead of 3 is now it becomes more expensive, and now we use that as a justification to say, okay, well, if you want to file an IPR, it's $150,000 or something like that. So I think they're pulling every lever they can to make the PTAB as unattractive as they can, and at some point, right, there's going to be a fair amount of pushback on that, whether it's an oversight hearing or, some kind of political pressure. I'm not sure that stakeholders, the large stakeholders anyway, are paying, not that they're not paying attention to what's going on, but with tariffs and other fights going on, there's bigger fish to fry for the time being. But at some point, I think especially when we start hearing American companies and complaining that they're cutting research budgets and engineers because they have to deal with all these patent suits, there has to be some coming back a little bit, away from the precipice of where we are today.
So whenever I bring that particular thing up, the people who like it the way that it is will say, well, district court judges, they get to decide whether to issue a preliminary injunction and all the preliminary matters, and they're also the ones that sit at the trial. And I don't think that's the perfect analogy, and the reason is district court judges, they're a different, all federal judges are a different character. Say, put Judge Newman's issue aside. Ordinarily, you are a judge for life. You're on your own terms. You constitutionally can't have your salary reduced. And you're not creating work for yourself, because if you're going to have a job regardless, and you're going to get paid forever regardless. With the PTAB judges deciding to institute did feel to me like they were creating their own work, or potentially creating their own work, because they went out and they hired almost 300 of them, like 270 initially. And if they're not instituting, then there's not a need for all these judges. And I don't know that I would go so far as to say that these judges were intentionally, consciously doing that. But when you're hired to get rid of bad patents, then it's not a stretch to think that the patents that you see disproportionately are going to seem bad. And particularly when you're the one that is instituting and you're going to decide these cases, I just thought it sent optically the wrong message. And I've shared with so many people at the patent office over the years, it's like, if I were director, and no, we all know that's not going to happen, but if I were director, the first thing I would do would be to pull back the institution decisions of the PTAB, because that would be the easiest way to put your stamp on the PTAB and decide which cases do we go forward with, which cases do we not go forward with. And I would think, and I don't think you need to do it in a way that gets rid of judges. I think having more time to look at and dissect the cases that matter the most would make a lot of sense to everybody. But having somebody, what do you call it, a SWAT team or a couple panels that's all they really do, and they're maybe even move them into the 10th floor if they have office space up there, so that they really are an arm of the director deciding whether to institute or not institute, based on resources. And also based on, well, now, okay, I understand Blonder Tongue says you can challenge this, but this patent we've looked at 8 times already. So we're not going to look at it again. If you want to challenge it in district court, have at it. But I think that's the way to go. What say you?
I've never seen judges, sort of creating work for themselves. They've always had plenty of works, and my philosophy has always been, if you can get, you're going to win if you can get the judge to write the shortest opinion, right? So you reduce their work for them, and that's how you sort of find your way either into the patent office or out of the patent office. So, I was never that concerned that there was any kind of bias, especially on the back end, right? If there was, well, I instituted this to give myself work, and, now what am I going to do with it? I just... the federal circuit's looking over your shoulder at that point. I've always had a problem with the institution phase being a little bit of, right, no one's checking your work, and that can go both ways. You get bad decisions for patent owners, bad decisions for petitioners. There is, the director review process now that, at least in theory, should put a stop to that, but unless it's sort of a high-level policy, and there's such a volume of work coming in now between discretionary denials and everybody, right? The director loves patent owners, so every patent owner files a director review on any argument they can think of. And so, there are other mechanisms there. I just, like I said, I think changing the number of judges probably isn't going to make, any kind of dent. It's just one of those things that I think people viscerally just feel like that looks bad. So I'm fine fixing it. That doesn't bother me.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it will make a difference. I just do think that a lot of these things, low hanging fruit, we should just deal with. Like, for the life of me, I don't understand why the PTAB has not adopted a code of judicial conduct. And we had the one judge, we don't need to relitigate that, who did some really stuff that I think a lot of people were turned off by, based on who he had worked for previously, and then deciding so many petitions, and then not so surprisingly, almost all the petitions he decided for that former client, he decided in favor of that former client. I don't know of any other judge that did that. Okay, so I don't think that there's a rampant need for a PTAB code of conduct, but it's such low-hanging fruit that would build confidence in the system that it defies explanation to me. Why just do it? Because I do think, well, however many PTAB judges they've had, right? Let's say there's been 500 or 600 over the life of the there's been one who I think acted unethically. I mean, it's not rampant, but just put that argument away.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's probably more of a bureaucracy thing where it needs to be done by Commerce, and then you've got the other agencies with other judges that, it's just one of those governmental things where it seems like it's something that could be fixed pretty simple, but, like everything with the government takes forever. It's just like every idea about amendments at the PTAB, maybe we should send them back to examiners and get them involved. Makes perfect sense. Problem is you're dealing with unions and workflow.
Not anymore.
So, I mean, yeah, not anymore. But, so some things that seem, from a private sector standpoint, pretty easy to fix can just be a mess. So that's more of a governmental thing, I think.
And that brings us back to some extent where we started, right? It would be wonderful if the government actually operated or functioned. And it seems like the only way that you can get anything done is by governing via memo. And I don't know how we get out of that loop.
And that's the problem. Congress can't get anything done. We've got these continuing budget resolutions that disrupt everything every 6 months to a year. And everybody wastes all their time on that, on confirmation hearings, on impeachment hearings. There's no law coming out of Congress. So now we've got agencies that are doing whatever they want. And it's great when they're doing what you want. But again, in a couple of years, it's going to flip. And that's just not the way that the government can operate on any long-term basis.
It just feels to me like all of our leaders are engaged in this, like, fighting at recess. We're in third grade, and you're fighting over stuff that doesn't matter. I don't, for the life of me, understand why at least the Trump's nominees who have bipartisan support, why can't you do this via voice vote or by unanimous consent, which, as I understand, President Trump so far is the only president ever to not have any appointments confirmed based on either a voice vote or unanimous consent, when in fact I think it's something like half of the ones that are pending still have no opposition. I mean, there's maybe opposition, but they have bipartisan support. Yeah. So if they came up to a vote, they would pass. I mean, John Squires, for example, seems to have the support of all the Republicans, which is not shocking, but also seems to have support of people like Senator Coons and at least some of the Democrats.
Yeah. I think it's just floor time, right? It's just no one cares about the patent office really, and we've got other fights to have. I was sort of explaining this to someone the other day. I went to the Philadelphia public school system, and when we had a substitute teacher, 80% of the class was acting like lunatics, running around with lampshades on their head, and the other 20% of us are sitting there thinking, shit, tomorrow's really going to be awful when the teacher shows back up. And that we see this every 4 years, and both parties are doing it. It's just, let's just act crazy and see how far we can push it, and hopefully we stay in power. But if we don't, we've made this mess for the other side. They're gonna waste all their time cleaning it up, and they won't accomplish anything. And that's just where we are.
Yeah. Well, on that happy note, I really don't want to end on that low note. Is there some message that you would like to send a message of optimism, because unfortunately so many of these conversations, as you can imagine right now, and you write, so you tend to focus on the hair on fire, pants on fire, world coming to an end type issues, and it's easy to get real pessimistic. But is there a happy message or a silver lining that you see, or something that you'd like to leave the audience with that isn't sort of like slit your wrists and it's all over kind of?
I mean, it's it's like squeezing a balloon. You put pressure on one end and the other end grows. That's the patent system. So, right now it's, as my old shop teacher would say, it's time to make hay while the sun is shining if you're a patent owner, because right now there's no better time to assert patents than right now. We're seeing, names from the past like Intellectual Ventures filing lawsuits again. So, it's, if you're in that industry, if you're asserting patents, it's a great time. And the PTAB has been beaten down, but it's still there. They're accepting PGRs, they're accepting IPRs on patents that aren't that old. So it's like everything else. You just adapt. The strategies change, and you just have to realize that they're going to keep changing and waffling back and forth. And, if you're going to stay in the game, you just have to accept it and adapt.
And is there a message that you'd like to send to the alleged infringers, to the implementers, who to some extent do look at this and say, "Oh my God, this is not the game that we signed up for. This is not what we thought we were getting." Is there a stay the course message or any kind of optimism?
I think for your serial defendants, right, the companies that are driving IPR filings, is you're just budgeting more for settlements now, which is music to the ears of patent owners. But that money's got to come from somewhere, and it's coming out of someone else's budget that may be innovating or maybe hiring engineers. And if you're a patent owner, you say, well, they shouldn't have stolen our invention, but again, it's the scope of these claims. It's the low quality of examination. In some cases, that's true, but in a lot of cases, it's not. So, unfortunately, you just have to weather the storm until the system comes back into some kind of balance.
Is it a pick and choose your battles kind of moment for the implementers?
I think, and maybe invest in some hotels in Texas, and because it's going to be the Wild West down there for a couple of years.